Hello, and welcome to Nameless Studio. I'm your host, Tyler. Today we are going to be finishing our 11 by 14 encaustic piece based on the video game Death Stranding. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a little encaustic pro tip if I could. So encaustic bricks come looking like this if they are from R and F. Other companies have different labeling, most of which are actually much worse than this. The issue we see here is once you melt this block down past, say, the size of this label, you need to remove it in order to use it. Now, you take two colors like so, and there is very little difference you can tell between them just from looking at the bricks. So, being able to tell the difference between colors, especially if you are working in very similar tonal range, can be difficult once you start using your bricks to the point when they are too small to keep their proper labeling on them. So, my suggestion would be to actually keep a bin where you label the bins and try and put your encaustic bricks back into those bins so that you have an easier way of knowing which ones are which, because sometimes at first glance it can be very difficult to tell, one, if these two are different colors, and then which one is which. So, encaustic pro tip, keep bins and label those so that you can put back your encaustic bricks in said labeled bins for easier knowledge of which are which. So with that, let's get started. Okay, so if you remember where we left off yesterday, we had just put down a little layer of an encaustic graphite. So as you can see right here, it did kind of create more of a grayer tone than that intense carbon black that we had down beforehand. So now, on top of that graphite encaustic layer, we're going to put down another light layer of the intense carbon black just to get that contrast level and those deep dark blacks back in there to more areas than just those little spots in the middle there. Because we definitely want that highlighted contrast to be permeating throughout that sort of amorphous edge that we have going on here. So right now that's what I'm doing, is painting in a little bit more of the intense carbon black encaustic. As I showed you before, both these colors are very similar when looking at them, but especially when they dry, you can really see a difference. The graphite is much more of a matte finish, while the intense carbon has a much higher sheen to it. So getting those colors to interact well can be a little difficult. So that's why we want to find a good balance between them. So now we're going to fuse this layer to the one below it and just give it a little bit of motion to bring about some more of that sort of spreading and goo-like sort of nature of what we want this sort of base ground layer to kind of look like. So we're just slowly giving little licks, because again, we don't really want the layers underneath to be moving too much. We just want that carbon black to really spread over what we've already done. So we don't want to have too much movement going on here, but we do want just a little bit in that carbon black more than anything else. So it takes a lot of just little licks. So again, this is why I prefer using the blowtorch rather than a heat gun. I do feel like I can get a little bit more into the nooks and crannies and really focus on certain areas with this heat rather than the much more radial heat that you get from a heat gun, which would heat more of the surface than the torch does. So just a little bit of movement there. We didn't want a whole lot going on, just enough to spread and move and give sort of motion to that encaustic layer. And as it is, things are looking pretty well finished overall. There's just a few more little details and whatnot that we want to do here. I feel like the top is well balanced, doesn't feel overly cluttered, has a lot of detail without feeling too busy. So we have a good balance there. The bottom is now feeling much more complete. We definitely have a lot more elements in play. It's feeling a lot more grounded with that intense carbon black kind of filling out some more of that detail in those dark sort of areas there. But we still want a couple more details and scenarios to kind of put in here to help kind of finish off this piece. Not too much, but we need enough to feel like it's not just this sort of floating sort of egg of space that we're working around. We want a couple more elements to kind of ground this base area just a little bit, because especially in the corners, there's not much happening. So for now we're just kind of scraping some parts out to make them feel a little bit more worn in and a part of the whole. You'll see me do that pretty much after every firing, just putting in little details to help sort of reassociate the layer that I've put in with the rest, because a lot of what I'm doing here does come from wearing stuff down, peeling stuff back. So whenever you have a layer that has none of that going on, it can look like it's a little out of place. So there's always a little bit of X-Acto knife work after I've fired a layer. So that's all we're doing here, is just getting a little bit more of those fine details hammered in and intertwined with the rest of it. Get some of those under layers protruding from the top layers, things like that. Because there's a lot to find when you start to look at this piece, with any of these pieces really. And so when I'm looking in close detail, I don't want anyone to feel like something seems out of place, for reasons like it doesn't feel like it's integrated enough as the whole. So with that scraping done, we are going to add just a couple other touches, mainly with the transfer paper. And we're going to be using white at this point to sort of balance out the couple of the strong white aspects that we have going on here, especially in high contrast to the blacks that we have going on. Now the tool that I'm using right here is a tool that I fight with a lot. It's an interesting tool. It's basically a circle ruler, which is kind of nice, and it allows you to kind of make whatever size circle you want. The biggest issue I have with it is that it doesn't tend to lay flat. So when trying to use it as basically a stencil, getting the whole thing to sit so you can trace that inner circle can be a little difficult. So I tend to use it when I'm not doing a full circle, because I can hold down one side and make that work pretty well without having to do the other. But it's an interesting tool. It works a little bit better than the compass does, partly because with the compass I am using a pencil tip on that, and it's usually too dull, and so the line tends to be a little bit more diffused and fat. When I use the circle ruler, I can use a pen, so I can get a much cleaner, finer line doing it that way. So I kind of take the pros and cons from both methods and go with something where I can get a much finer line. Even with that fine line though, I don't want this shape to really stand out as the predominant sort of structure on this base part. So we are, like I just said, taking an X-Acto knife to it and wearing it down quite a bit. Really on the edges, so you don't see much of that, and you're really just seeing a very soft outline, rounded outline on the edge there, and working with that. And then at this point, looking at the piece as a whole, it looks pretty well. It's nearly there. The one issue I'm having right now is the bottom left. It feels a little empty down there. But I don't want there to be too much happening where your eye gets drawn down there, but at the same time it feels like it is missing something. So this is a tough stage of the piece where you don't want to add too much to complicate things or draw attention away from others, but you do need to add a few little details to help balance out a piece. So with the bottom left, my original thought was to kind of do a sort of gradient line scenario, kind of like what we did with the sort of vertical lines up at the top left, top right there, and do something similar down at the bottom. But that, I think, would have drawn way too much attention with having that many line elements going on down there. So instead of doing that, we are going to opt to just do something much simpler, much more straightforward, and just to add one small little element without getting too busy. And because we've already added one other white line element, this is also not going to feel too out of place by having something so simple here, because it is kind of mimicked and mirrored in the other circle element that we just put down beforehand. So instead of doing a lot of line elements like we did in the top right, we're going to do a single line element. And that is really going to finish off this piece. Just by, you can't even really see it at this point, but it's just a simple line element so that when your eye gets to this area, you now have movement to move yourself back up and into the piece. So it doesn't add any details that really draws your eye to it, but once you get to that area, that line element then moves you back up and into the rest of the composition. That's all we were really trying to do, is keep that movement of the piece working for you. So this is what we have as a finished piece. This is, again, the first 11 by 14 piece that we've done on this channel. Let me know what your thoughts are. Is it finished? Do you find it finished? Do the thematic elements that I have talked about come through to you? Let me know down in the comments how you feel about this piece. Does it read as I was saying it? Is there something you would do differently? I would love to know. But that is going to be all for us today. So as always, I've been Tyler with Nameless Studio. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content like it. Until next time, I've been Tyler. Be seeing you.